Now, if we take a look at the filter, with Massive, you've got the option of running two filters, either parallel, side by side, and you can see for each oscillator you can choose. There's a fader here that decides how much of the output we're sending over to the filter 1 circuit and how much over to filter 2. So we could potentially run, one filter doing one thing, another filter doing another thing, and we could run those filters either in series, one after the other, or parallel, side by side, so they're processing the sound at the same time. In this case, however, we are just using filter 1. We're sending each of our oscillators directly to filter 1. We're using a low pass filter. Let's just hear the difference there. So actually, if I just take off this modulation for a moment. There's your low pass filter. We're filtering off the higher harmonics of the sound. I'm using envelope number 1 here to modulate the filter cutoff. So if we just take a look at that, we can see fast attack time, sustain level sitting at about a quarter, decay fairly swift, again as with the amplitude envelope, and long release time on that. So the filter is very quickly opening and then closing again to give us a little bit more of a stab sound rather than the splash sound. So without the filter, that sounds to me more like a splash. Whereas with the filter on, we're getting short, sharp stabs, bursts of sound. And that's achieved using the filter envelope. Okay, so we're nearly there. Next up, really nice element of the original. If you hear, especially on that first note, compare that with my first note. That is a clear defined pitch, whereas there's a little bit of a slide, a glide, or portamento, i.e. it slides up to the note pitch that's played rather than being there from the outset. So that's achieved using the glide control here. What we also need to take into account before we look at the glide control, we just go over to voicing. We want to ensure that we've got a monophonic patch. So if you've got polyphonic selected, you need to switch off that. And what we can do now, move over to the oscillator section. And it's now gliding between note pitches. Too much of that, and you can hear it's taking its time. But just a little bit on that, and it gives the the line a nice sort of drunken feel, I suppose. Okay, so that's a really important aspect of the sound. The next really important aspect, to create a big lead sound, we need to look at potentially some unison spread, some chorus, and we've got a dimension expander master effect over here, which we're going to take a look at now. So if we just turn the unison spread off, and I'm just going to reset the unison count back to 1. Okay, so this is the number of synth voices which will be playing the notes simultaneously. With it set to 1, you can hear the sound is quite thin. It doesn't have the same body to it that it just did have. Okay, so now we've got 3 synth voices playing each of these notes programmed simultaneously. But where we get the big sound from is we need to slightly detune those voices from one another. Too much and it'll just sound out of tune. little bit, and we get that nice thick sound. So potentially we could increase the number of unison voices. Too many, it maybe starts to sound a little bit messy. That's a really important control. Just to pitch them apart from one another ever so slightly. Okay, so we look at the master effects now. First of all, we've got a chorus. And a chorus is a device whereby the signal is split. We've got a dry side, we've got a wet side. The wet side is pitch modulated. So you've got two instances of the signal. One is as it was, the other, it's got a slight wobble on the pitch, and therefore it, has the effect of thickening up the sound again. I suppose it's a similar sort of effect as the unison in a way. So you can see we just dialed in chorus here. Dry wet is at about 40%. Rate's fairly slow, and we've just dialed in a little bit of depth there. And we've got this really nice effect called Dimension Expander. And again, it's really effective at just adding a little bit of ambience to the sound. It really puts the sound in sort of like a room environment, quite a tight room environment. Just adds a little bit of width to the sound. And finally, we've got a little bit of EQ. So we've just nudged down the lower frequencies with the low shelf. We've just given the higher frequencies a little boost with the high shelf. And we found a band in the middle. Just to give a little bit more presence. Let's just compare that with the original. And that's near enough for me. So, just a quick recap. We've got 3 oscillators. That's the first port of call where we decide the exact timbre of the sound that we're going to be starting with. So that is obviously a fundamentally really important consideration. The next really important consideration is breathing a bit of aggression into those oscillators using the modulation oscillators. A bit of ring mod and a bit of phase modulation on that. To get the short, sharp stab feel, we've used a filter envelope to modulate the cutoff. So rather than the splashy sound, we've got the short, sharp, stabby sound, and that's combined with a relatively short amplitude envelope. We have used a little bit of glide or portamento to breathe a bit of drunkenness into the line, i.e. there's no clear defined pitch shifts. We're gliding between note pitches. That needs to be combined with the fact that it's a monophonic patch. And finally, we've just beefed up the sound a little bit more using unison. So increasing the number of voices that's playing each note that we've programmed and pitching those slightly away from each other. And finally, using the master effects to add more width and thickness, chorus, and the dimension expander. So, just to save you the hassle potentially, you'll be able to download this preset from the Manchester Midi School website. Details below. Thanks for watching.